All right, you ready to set up your own private equity fund but don't know where to start? By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to get started. Okay, so first, what is a private equity fund? Well, a private equity fund is basically a investment vehicle that is a pool of capital. So you get lots of investors and they all pool their money together. And then you have an investment professional that's guiding where that money goes. Generally, private equity funds, when we talk about private equity, usually most people relate that to leverage buyout private equity, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could be a growth equity investor or even a venture capital fund as a type of private equity investor. But essentially, that investment professional will identify investments that he or she wants to make. They'll call up their investors that have made commitments to the fund and say, hey, remember how you committed to invest in this fund? Well, hey, I need your money. In fact, I'm an investor in a fund, and I just got a call a couple weeks ago saying, hey, we're doing a capital call. We need X% of the amount of money you committed. So in that case, I committed to the fund that I was going to invest a certain amount of money, let's say like $1 million. Then they call me up and say, hey, remember how you committed that $1 million? Well, I need 5% of it. So I would take 5% of my cash, right? Maybe I'd have to liquidate some other assets or whatever, but I would take 5% of that, so 50 grand, and I wire that over. They then take that 50 grand and they combine it with a bunch of other money from all the other investors, which might end up being worth several $1,000,000, and then they will then invest in that company. Hopefully that company does well and performs well, and when it gets acquired or goes public, they take that return and then they distribute it back out to all the investors like myself who are LPs. So that's generally how these funds are structured. The way that the investment professional makes money is by charging fees on both the profits that they help generate through their investments as well as what's called management fees. Now, management fees are usually about 2%. They vary between 2 and 3%, but usually 2% of the assets of the fund. So if you have a $100 million fund, you're going to pay roughly $2 million in fees. Or if you're the investment professional, you're going to get paid $2 million through your management fees every year. And that's supposed to cover your salary, your overhead, your office space, your travel. And that basically covers all those different expenses related to running a fund. The management fee, though, ultimately has to be paid back before you receive the other way you make money, which is through carried interest. And carried interest is that percentage of the profits. So usually it's about 20%. It can go as high as 30%. Honestly, it can go wherever you negotiate it with your investors. But generally, market is about 20%. So what that means is if I take my $100 million fund and I turn it into $300 million, I've generated $200 million of profit. I'm going to get 20% of that as the investment professional, or $40 million. And that's really where private equity investors make the bulk of their money. $40 million sounds great, but it gets even better if you, let's say you manage $1 billion fund. All of a sudden, that's not $40 million, that's $400 million going back to these investors. And sometimes these investors, these groups aren't very big. It could only be like, total staff of like 10 to 15 people managing $1 billion in assets and pulling in 400 million. And then of course the bulk of that flows to the very top, right? So anyways, there's clearly like a lot of potential money to be made in the sector if you can pull it off. The flip side though is that it's hard to pull it off. It's hard to raise a private equity fund, especially if you have no track record. And the reason for that is because as a private equity investor, you got to go out and sell something that's really hard to sell. You basically go to investors and you say, hey, give me your money for 10 years and I will invest it in a bunch of stuff. But it's going to be great. I don't know what it is yet, but it's going to be great. But you'll have no say in what it is. And then at the end of 10 years, we'll get you all your money back plus a nice healthy return, of which I'm going to take 20%. That is a tough thing to sell investors on, especially if you don't have much of a track record. So how do you build a track record? Well, let me tell you about my friend and the way he's doing it. So he recently left a firm, largely because he wanted to grow and get to the top of the firm, and there just frankly wasn't room for him at the top. And like I said earlier, that $400 million of potential profit goes to the top, right? So if you have like 10 people working at the firm, there might be like 3 to 5 of them that are actually partners, and they're splitting up that money, and everybody else is getting like maybe a little bit, if anything at all. And so he was like, hey, look, I want to build my own firm. And so he left his firm, which is kind of a gutsy move, and he started doing his own deals. He's now closed several deals. And he was smart in that he has spent a lot of his career building relationships with potential investors. And so now what he does is he sets up these SPVs. An SPV is a special purpose vehicle. And essentially what it is this legal entity where you can pool capital into it. And then it has one purpose. And that purpose is to invest into a company. And so what he'll do is he'll go and he'll find an amazing investment opportunity. He'll negotiate with the entrepreneur to get a piece of the transaction. And then he'll go to his list of investors and he'll sell the deal and how amazing the deal is. And they pony up money because they want access to this deal. And so they'll put money into the SPV. He charges fees that are similar to a fund. So he's charging some management fee up front usually. You know, it could be a few percentage of the total amount that's being raised. And then he charges carry. So he's going to get, 10 to 20%, whatever he ends up negotiating with his investors on the backside based on the performance of that investment. So overall, he's kind of doing it, right? He just isn't doing it through a fund yet. But over time, as he does more of these deals and builds more of a track record and is able to prove to his investors that even outside of his old investment firm, he's able to drive great returns and find great deals for them, he'll be able to get capital commitments in and raise a fund and actually make a go of it and be at the top. And to be honest, that's how a lot of people do it. New funds generally get started because somebody can't break into the top and they feel like they're the ones that are driving most of the value at the firm. They're sourcing the deals, they're doing the fundraising, they're doing the hard work. And so they end up spinning out. Sometimes they're able to raise a fund right away, especially if they're able to grab a few other people to come along with them. And together they kind of use their track record to raise a fund. But in other cases, they do it through SPVs, and they do a handful of these SPVs to build a track record and then use that track record to end up raising a fund. That's probably the most common way in which it gets done today. And the benefit there is that you don't have to sell yourself. You just have to sell the deal. You just have to find a good deal. And if you're willing to hustle, and you're willing to network, and you're willing to put yourself out there, and you're willing to do the things to learn what it takes to identify a good deal and do the due diligence and support those companies, all of which are like very doable things, then you can end up raising your own private equity fund. But let me just wrap up with this question. Is it worth it? Clearly, if you can build a firm that has $1 billion and turn that into $3 billion and $400 million worth of carry, then yeah, it's probably worth it, right? That's a pretty good payday. Even if you have to split that 5 ways, that's a pretty good day. But here's the other thing. If you are entrepreneurial, like I am, I love it. Like I get up excited to go to work every single day. I get to work with brilliant entrepreneurs and be a small part of their success. I get to learn about all kinds of new industries, new business models, meet new people, new perspectives on the world. I just love it. And if you're somebody that's intellectually curious, then this can be a really fun place to work. It's also great if you're somebody that likes problem solving, because invariably there are tons of problems and you get to roll up your sleeve and try to find solutions. It's also a great place if you love networking and you love people. I would say I love people, but I don't love networking. But look, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And there are a lot of ways to be a great networker and to build relationships with people. Ultimately, I believe that like venture capital and private equity can be an incredibly fulfilling career. It's not easy. And, there are very few that are able to pull it off. But those that are willing to put in the time, the effort, the hustle, willing to take the risk, right? To leave to burn the bridges and burn the ships and move forward, oftentimes are able to see massive success. If this topic is interesting to you, be sure to check out my other video on how to start a private equity fund with no money, where I dive in a little bit deeper into some of the aspects of building a private equity firm and how to do that with even less resources than my buddy did when he left his firm. Thanks.